this day and age, information is constantly at our fingertips, and opinions on everything under the sun are allowed a platform. The voices of the minority can outshout the majority. Or is it the majority that crushes the minority? Does anyone really know? And what will our world look like in another generation? Feels a little dramatic, doesn't it? But for homeschoolers who are consistently accused of sheltering our kids and preventing them from hearing other points of view, I thought it would be a good idea to take a closer look at critical thinking.
Now, the point was made that critical thinking depends on learning what is universal in thinking.
Dr. Richard Paul is considered a leading expert on critical thinking, and he breaks it down into 9 different stages: purpose, question exploration, list out assumptions, identify point of view, gather information, identify concepts, interpret, and consequences. To make this easier to understand, we're going to use a case study. The Space Shuttle Columbia was built in 1975 and was named after the first American sloop to circumnavigate the globe. Its first successful flight into space was in 1981, and it had successfully flown 27 missions by 2003. Because of its track record of success over the span of 2 decades, many viewed space travel as routine. Columbia was scheduled again to launch in 2003, and it had already been delayed 13 times, and everyone was eager to see this thing take off. It was to be a 16-day solo mission with 80 U.S. and international experiments. A lot was riding on this mission, not to mention a $7 billion tax investment.
11, 10, 9, 8, 7. We have a go for main engine start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have booster ignition and liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia with a multitude of national and international space research experiments.
The cameras almost didn't catch it. A piece of foam that hit the side of the left wing. This wasn't particularly unusual. It even had a name: foam shedding. As space shuttles take off, foam would routinely fall and hit the side of the shuttle, and it was such a norm that when it was brought to the attention of management, it was dismissed. On February 1st, 2003 at 8:44 a.m., Columbia re-entered Earth's atmosphere from orbit. 4.5 minutes after re-entry, a sensor began recording strain on the left wing and then a rise in temperature. At 9 a.m., the orbiter broke apart and the debris scattered across the southern part of the U.S. All 7 members of the crew lost their lives. Everyone thinks, but much of our thinking left to itself is biased, distorted, partial, uninformed, or downright prejudiced. Yet the quality of our life and that of what we produce, make, or build depends precisely on the quality of our thought. Shoddy thinking is costly, both in money and in quality of life. Excellence in thought, however, must be systematically cultivated. That's a quote from Dr. Richard Paul from his miniature guide of critical thinking concepts and tools. Using his elements of thought, let's take a closer look at the decisions that brought a country to a standstill.
All thinking involves these 8 elements. It doesn't matter what you're thinking about. Your thinking always has a purpose, a goal, or an aim, an agenda. It's a question about the agenda of the thinking. What are you after? What is your aim? What is your goal?
The primary purpose of the space shuttle is usability. The Space Shuttle program began with its conception in 1960. Its primary goal was to provide NASA with an efficient, reusable method of carrying astronauts to and from a permanently manned space station. NASA wanted the Space Shuttle to also serve as a multi-purpose satellite delivery vehicle. The words cheap and routine were used frequently when discussing the Space Shuttle, which is laughable now in retrospect. Fast forward to 2003, and the question at hand would echo to some extent the original purpose of the shuttle. It wasn't until the second day that NASA noticed foam hitting the side of the wing. In a routine review of the launch, analysts could see the foam, but could not clearly make out the level of damage it caused, if any. A debris assessment team requested DoD to use their satellites to take pictures of the orbiter. The question was, did the foam hit cause damage? Rodney Roca was among the engineers who initially noticed the foam.
We have ground-based telescopes, and we meaning the military does, and satellites up there. I'm aware that we used some of that in the early shuttle flights in the 80s. Some of that was used and was classified. So that's why in my email request I said, let's ask, and I actually said, let's beg for outside agency assistance. And I explained why. There's too many possibilities here. Some of them are very bad.
There are no dumb questions. That's something I heard all the time when I was in school. Be curious, ask questions. Don't worry about looking silly. There are no dumb questions. But here's the thing, there is a difference between a thoughtful, complex question versus one that was pulled out of thin air. Experts tend to ask questions that are broader, have more depth, and don't balk at potential obstacles. Novices don't know what questions to ask. They don't have the vocabulary or knowledge to ask thoughtful, complex questions. Dr. Richard Paul believed that he could close the gap.
If I change the question, I change the direction. If I ask a legal question, it leads us into the law. If I ask a moral question, it leads us into moral principles. And these are two very different kinds of things. The question determines the sort of thing we need to consider to get an answer.
Novices still could ask thoughtful questions that could get to the root of the problem. This is key for homeschoolers because if they know the right questions to ask, then they can solve anything. The main component of asking a question in a critical thinking model is distinguishing different types of questions. Questions with definitive answers, those with subject opinion, to those that take into consideration multiple viewpoints. Did the foam cause damage? This was a definitive question with a definitive answer that should not have been swayed by opinion or other viewpoints. But the problem was, that's exactly what happened.
Okay, good morning and welcome to the MMT. Okay, go ahead, John.
Okay. We've received the data from the systems integration guys. The analysis is not complete, but it's kind of just jump us to the conclusion of all that. But we do not see any kind of safety of flight issue here yet in anything that we've looked at.
No safety flight, no issue for this mission, nothing that's going to do different.
Right.
There may be a turnaround. That's it? All right, any questions on that?
NASA mission management team canceled the imagery request to the DoD. Maneuvering the orbiter to allow a picture of its left wing would have interrupted ongoing science operations. It was also assumed that anything the DoD took images of would not clearly show damages well enough to assess. There are a lot of factors at play when analyzing the Columbia. There's chain of command. There's multiple groups of very intelligent people working within NASA and outside of NASA. There is the risk of unnecessary alarm, jeopardizing the mission, not to mention all the money that is involved. It would be wrong and potentially trivializing to say this is what we could have done to fix it, but there is benefit in analyzing this. With the question, did the foam damage the shuttle? A lot of assumptions were made. Foam had happened in the past with little to no consequence beyond possible maintenance when the shuttle returned to Earth. These assumptions from shuttle management led to a hazardous point of view that left little opening to other points of view. Other points of view that could have potentially saved the Columbia.
I'm always thinking within a frame of reference. I'm always thinking within a point of view. So the question can always be asked, what is your point of view? Or what is the point of view of this subject?
Had to blow a little bit more now, Laura.
Okay.
Okay, all that's working. It's noisy in there, isn't it?
See? Oh, is that it?
There it is.
Right there. There it is.
Yeah, I see it. I saw it.
Oh, that's beauty.
There's 7 people in that thing.
Wow.
Wow. So
It's about how you described it, Chris.
look at the chunks coming off of it.
Yeah.
What the heck is
I
that?
don't know, but I see what you're saying. Ice, maybe?
Debris from the Space Shuttle Columbia covered eastern Texas all the way through southern Louisiana. The debris was laid out in the shape of the orbiter to find patterns and clues. Roughly 84,000 pieces of debris weighing 85,000 pounds was recovered, which was about 38% of the original orbiter. In July of that year, during the investigation, a piece of 1-pound foam was shot at 500 miles per hour to simulate conditions of the launch at a wing panel. Usually, when a shuttle streaks through the upper atmosphere, it hits the air immediately around it to a temperature as high as 10,000 degrees. The panels are designed to create a boundary layer which heats to 3,000 degrees and allows the shuttle to withstand takeoff and re-entry. The hole in the foam had created meant the wing was exposed to 10,000 degree heat. There's this interesting pattern of behavior called the Einstellung effect. It is where you use previous experiences to solve a problem when a more apparent or obvious solution might work better. It's like entering into a mechanic state where you become so fixated on a solution you can't even accept that there might be a better way of doing it. Critical thinking is linked to being able to ask good questions, being humble enough to admit that you do not know everything, but you don't stop there. People need to be able to interpret the data that they gather and then be open to the possibility of another way to see it. There are 175 different types of recognized cognitive biases, and these biases shape how we think and perceive the world, and if we are not aware of them, they can cause extreme harm. I want to root my kids in good things, and I want to root them in truth. Shielding them from other points of view, from other ways people think and live their lives, only means that later on they are susceptible to being manipulated. Becoming critical thinkers does not mean that we become easily persuadable to think differently, but it does mean that we open ourselves up to the other side. It is an excellent exercise in empathy and compassion. It is not a chance to say a biased point of view, well, this is the other side and this is what they believe, and obviously they're murderers. It is opening ourselves up to, this is how a good person would think about this issue differently from myself. It is giving the other person, the other point of view, the benefit of the doubt. And that is what makes a good critical thinker. How do we teach our kids to be critical thinkers? It's asking good questions, being open to other answers. I think we can do it.